Sam Vecenie from The Athletic joins us to discuss who the Charlotte Hornets should take at number 2. And he even gives us some combine risers for the Hornets to possibly select at number 27. That's coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
We're Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your pods. That includes YouTube, by the way. Thanks for making us your first listen. That's Doug Branson. You can catch him on everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can listen to me in the city of Charlotte on WFNZ from 12 to 3 every weekday. And that's Sam Vecenie, making his, I believe, first appearance in at least a while on Locked On Hornets. So we appreciate Sam hopping on, a senior writer at The Athletic, also host of the Game Theory podcast. You can also check that out on YouTube. Find him on Twitter at Sam Vecenie. Sam, how busy have you been the past week after the lottery and even before that?
Laughably, basically 8 a.m. until 11 p.m. every night at this point. That's the reality. Trying to stay above water, finishing up the NBA draft guide. And I think yesterday I was literally on the phone from 8 a.m. until I think 7 p.m. So it's just a ridiculous amount of time at this point.
No, it's a huge help. We appreciate the valuable time that you're spending with us. And so let's just get right to it. I mean, we know Wemby is going to go to San Antonio. I heard Kirk Goldsberry talking about this on the Zach Lowe pod. Like, their draft models are thrown out the window. It's the easiest job in the world. Take Wemby number 1. We're all good. And then we'll focus what to do a little bit later. The Hornets still have a lot of work to do, and the classic saying, it starts with them, right? So according to you, Sam Vecenie, before more information comes out on Brandon Miller and just before some of the workouts happen, who do you think the Hornets should take number 2 as it stands right now?
So should is different than where I wonder if where they're at, kind of. So should, I think they should take Scoot Henderson. Scoot Henderson is my number 2 player in this draft. I think he is the clear number 2 player personally. I think he's explosively athletic. I think he's an incredible shot creator. His ability to combine body control with real explosiveness at his length, which is something in the vicinity of 6'2" with a 6'9" wingspan, it's pretty special at the end of the day. I really truly believe in him as an exceptionally high level creator in the NBA. And this comes from someone that I do not like small players in the NBA. Like, I just do not like them typically. Right now I think it is 3 guys under 6 foot, or no, it's 6'3" or under in my entire top 50. I tend not to value these guys at a super high level because it is hard to keep them on the court in the playoffs unless they are just so exceptionally good as shot creators. And I think Scoot Henderson is that guy at the end of the day. I really, truly do. He is also the kind of player that is a culture changer kind of unto himself. He is just a real force of competitiveness and everything that you look for in terms of the kind of player that you build around when trying to rebuild your organization and rebuild your roster and trying to create a circumstance where you can contend for an NBA championship. I believe in this dude. I really, truly think he's one of the best guards I've ever evaluated in the near decade I've been doing this.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, I saw you had him number 2 on your latest mock draft. Does it feel weird after all of this time where it felt like people were saying Scoot would be consensus 1 in a lot of drafts if it weren't for Victor Wembanyama? Does it feel weird now that you sort of have the alt take? Because it feels like everybody's now moving to Brandon Miller at number 2. Like, what's going on there? Well, let me ask this. Do you think you're driving the Scoot wagon, or are you just a passenger on the Scoot wagon?
I certainly don't think I'm driving the Scoot wagon at all. I think that Brandon Miller is a completely reasonable take at number 2 if you think he is a genuine shot creator and shot hunter and like mismatch like predator, like in terms of like being able to, hunt out those incredible mismatches against small guards on the block or against bigs on the perimeter when he strings them out and ball screens. If you think he is athletic enough to consistently get shots in those capacities, I completely get it. I think having Brandon Miller at number 2 is an entirely reasonable take. I am probably like 10% lower on his efficiency in those moments. I think he can do them. I just worry a little bit about the explosiveness long term in terms of how he's able to separate from those players and get efficient looks consistently. But I think he is an excellent, like genuinely elite prospect, and anybody that has him at number 2, I completely get it. And I think there's a pretty decent chance that the Hornets end up taking him. Like, I am far from sold that they end up taking Scoot Henderson. I think this thing is going to be very wide open as they continue down their process.
Well, and that's part of the problem too. Like, so many people, even if, Scoot Henderson was the guy for so long. Brandon Miller had a great year at Alabama, and that's why it's a real discussion. But even more so with Charlotte, because people are worried about the fit between Scoot and LaMelo. It's something Doug and I are not worried about at all. We've still been saying, take Scoot. Hell, Doug might be the driver of the Scoot wagon. It was a setup and you passed, Sam. It's actually Doug that's driving the Scoot wagon. But we're not worried about the fit. What about you, Sam? Are you worried about the fit at all? What are the pros and cons there?
I am personally not worried about the fit at all. I think that they're actually very complementary players. LaMelo Ball is a 3 and layups, 3 and dunks, not really dunks all the time, but 3 and layups, 3 and at the rim kind of player. He excels in transition. He excels getting to his step back, and he does like to get into the paint and make high level passing reads. He's also, I don't mean this as a negative at all, but he gets by more on skill. He's more of a finesse player. He's incredibly gifted in terms of his creativity, right? Scoot Henderson is more of like a power athlete kind of player. He has a very real scoring mindset. He is trying to get downhill. He's trying to, again, much like LaMelo, get out in transition. I think they'd really excel in those areas. You look at what Scoot can bring as well. The one area of the court that I mentioned with LaMelo that I think he can sometimes not be as great at is the mid-range as a jump shooter, right? He does obviously have these wide variety of floaters and everything, but Scoot is kind of an end of shot clock creator who can get into that mid-range area and really create and really get those end of shot clock opportunities. As well, I think he's really going to put pressure on the basket as a finisher. He's a really creative finisher. I know the numbers this year are a little bit funky, but to be honest, I think that that's more a product of who he was playing around in the G League, what that situation was like, the fact that, frankly, he didn't have anything to compete for in terms of like wins and losses. I'm a big time believer in Scoot Henderson. I'm a big time believer in terms of him being able to complement LaMelo Ball. And I think that their games actually have a lot of synergy together in terms of the way that they would work on the court. And you can never have enough ball handling at the end of the day. Like, I truly believe that you can never have enough real shot creation on the court. Yeah, I have some concerns defensively. I do, but you know what? I had concerns about the Charlotte Hornets defense in the back half of the season. And from Valentine's Day onward, they had the 6th best defense in the NBA because Steve Clifford's awesome. So like, I just kind of believe in the fit. I think it would totally work and be fine. Again, if they evaluate Brandon Miller to be a better player than Scoot Henderson, totally get taking Brandon Miller, but I wouldn't rule out Scoot because of a fit-based concern.
Real quickly, before we move on to more on Brandon Miller, what do you say to people, because we've had a few of these in the YouTube comments, what do you say to people who look at Scoot's game and they go, hey, you take away all of those powerful highlight dunks and you actually have a flawed offensive player?
So if you watch a lot of the tape this year, I understand that take to an extent. I think that he was very willing to settle in the mid-range this season a little bit more than what you would like to see. I also think that some of those people often will bring up the low free throw rate and not understand that you take one free throw per opportunity, essentially. instead of 2 in the G League. So Scoot this year as I think 18-year-old for, what was it? 40% of the season, 50% of the season. I think he was like top 30 in terms of free throw rate this year in the G League. So I'm not as worried about that as some people seem to be, but I think there is a real case that he settled. The thing that I would say is just that I think the goal for Scoot this year was to get through this season unscathed in a real way. And he like dealt with some injuries throughout the course of the year. Like he got drilled in the face and ended up having to like wear a mask at times, right?
Cody Zeller special.
Oh yeah, we know that player.
I forget exactly what the injury was, but yeah, off the top of my head, he ended up, I think, hurting. He had a lower leg injury at some point that ended up seeing him miss some time. He just had these like little nicks and things, right, throughout the course of the year. Not like being injury prone, not being anything like that. He just got bumped and got hit the wrong way, like players sometimes do. And I think that, sometimes you end up in a circumstance where if the goal with the G League Ignite is not necessarily to win basketball games, and your personal goal is to essentially just get through the season unscathed, you probably end up settling a little bit more than what you would normally.
Well, let me just say that was a very detailed take. That was very nuanced, intelligence, all the things we've come to know Sam Vecenie for. You treated the YouTube commenters very well. I'll just say this. Those YouTube commenters are going to get run over by the Scoot wagon, and I will be driving.
Yeah, he will be. And then you're going to back it up, put it in reverse, and then you're going to run over him again because that's what Doug Branson is doing, driving the Scoot wagon. All right, we talked a lot about Scoot Henderson. We'll focus on Brandon Miller. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
That very intellectual Sam Vecenie is going to help us break down Brandon Miller tape in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. And all you have to do is add your ride to the My Garage tab and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right part, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. More from Sam Vecenie of The Athletic joining us next on the Locked On Hornets podcast. All right, Sam, let's transition to Brandon Miller this time, someone that really came onto the scene crazy strong because it was really an excellent year at Alabama. And I know you've been very understanding of anybody that thinks Brandon is the better player outright in this class, and maybe that think the Hornets should take Brandon Miller number 2 overall. So let's just get into his skill set. When we talk about Brandon being a guy that could be a number 1 option star with this team, I know you're about 10% less, and you feel like maybe that's 10% less coming from you, seeing him as that kind of player in the NBA. What is the ceiling for you with Brandon? Like, is it still okay, all NBA type of guy? What do you envision him most likely being at the NBA level?
Look, there are probably some all NBA outcomes if he ends up becoming this incredible, like, so much of the Brandon Miller conversation is based on what you think you can do with his lower half in terms of strength and in terms of adding physical capability to hold his ground on drives, physical capability to be able to not get bumped as he goes up to try and finish at the basket and, score at the rim against elite level size and rim protection. If you think he can do that and can continue to add that lower body strength to be able to hold his place when he gets bumped, look, there are definitely all NBA outcomes for Brandon Miller, I believe. I think he's more of an all-star level talent. Like, it's the difference between, somebody like Jason Tatum, Paul George versus somebody like Chris Middleton, right? And Chris Middleton's like an unbelievable player. and, has made 5 All-Star games or whatever, has a shot at the Hall of Fame at this point. Chris Middleton probably can't be a number 1 on like a really good team, right? He's phenomenal. And, it was a 50, 40, 88 guy or something at one point, averaging over 20 points per game. Incredible player, unbelievable talent. Sure. Just a little bit limited in terms of what he can get going toward the basket. With Brandon, I think that what we didn't see this year as well is actually something that people that saw him in high school that, like myself, really actually quite liked about him, which is the mid-range game. Brandon actually does have like a pretty real mid-range game. That was what he was most known for entering college. It's just that when he got to Alabama plays a scheme that is a little bit more up-tempo. They go for threes and layups, shots at the rim throughout the course of the game. That's their entire goal, right? That's what their offense is based around under Nate Oates and the differing assistant coaches that have come through there before getting head jobs. So when you look at it through that lens and you see some of the moments where Brandon Miller got a chance to be able to create those mid-range shots, you saw a guy that when you look at his 3-point shot, you might see a lower release point and wonder, oh, how does this translate to the mid-range? How does this look? But if you actually look through his lower level tape, you look at some of the mid-range opportunities he took at Alabama this year, you see that he actually is more than like he's capable of like raising that release point and being able to shoot up over the top of high level defenders. So I think that's a really important factor in the positive category of Brandon Miller in terms of being able to be a shot creator. I really like his pace and tempo in terms of being able to hunt out those mismatches and being able to either get a smaller guy switched onto him where he can shoot over the top, or potentially take that guy down onto the block, or being able to find that big and being able to kind of get that big strung out on an island. The thing is that when he gets big strung out onto an island, I think he's just a lot more comfortable getting to the step back right now. I think he struggles a little bit being able to actually beat that guy off the bounce and getting to the rim at a capable level. I think he needs to work on his footwork and sequencing in terms of his drives. And this stuff will come if he gets stronger and can add lower body strength. So a bet on Brandon Miller to me is a bet on being able to add to his lower body in terms of strength while maintaining that body control and fluidity that allows him to be dynamic.
Betting on that booty.
Sort of. It's more like, betting on hamstrings and core, like calves and things like that.
Yeah,
but
bet on those hammies.
Booty is important as well.
Doug, you had one question to go with, and that was your answer. It
wasn't really a question. It was more an observation that the Hornets would be betting on that booty. But here's I do have a question. It's less of a Brandon Miller question and more about something you said in that last answer, which is you were looking at his high school tape. And it's something I'm curious about, how the process of evaluating these players, both from your perspective as a journalist and from front office perspectives, evaluating these players now that everybody's 18, 19 years old. But not only that, you've got Brandon Miller, who's coming from D1 and a big program in Alabama. You've got the Thompson twins coming from Overtime Elite. What is that? And then you've got G League Ignite players now. Like, how difficult is it, and how are front offices, from what you're hearing, how are they adjusting to all of these different scenarios?
Yeah, so look, this is the first year where we've had this many, really the second year, but the first important year where we've had, for instance, OTE, right? Last year, Don Barlow and John Montero were prospects. Scouts had to get down to Atlanta and check them out, certainly. But with Amin and Asor Thompson being in this draft, it's really important to be able to contextualize and understand what those games look like. It's obviously really important to be able to contextualize the G League and understand what do these guys look like in an NBA open court. And then you go from watching the G League to watching college basketball, which not every program is Alabama in terms of offensive spacing and in terms of being able to consistently derive, strong high-level offense. So it's tricky for sure. You just really have to always remember what you're watching. You always have to remember the context of what you're watching, and sometimes how it can be difficult in order to figure all of that out and place it together. But as long as you always keep your mind on the context of what you're seeing and understanding the spacing, understanding the everything that's happening around the players that you're evaluating, I think that you can do it and keep it proper. Or you can just watch OTE and just be like, this is a transition show. Let's go with. And
Let's go with the other one.
You have to just kind of roll with it.
Yeah, well, and look, with Brandon Miller, speaking of that, we also have the off the court situation, right? And look, I know it's tough to break down. I understand there's going to be different opinions on how much you want that to affect the draft status of one Brandon Miller. We do know that the Charlotte Hornets sent investigators to Tuscaloosa to find their own information, because Brandon Miller is bringing his own attorney in these interviews where he's like, look, I can't talk about some of this. And I know you as an NBA franchise want to know, but we can't discuss it. And maybe that actually, kind of affected the Jonathan Givony report of him not doing well in interviews, whatever. I'll ask you this, Sam. How much does that affect your opinion on whether you should draft a Brandon Miller with his role in the death of Jamia Harris, where he was the one that transported the gun via driving the car to his ex-teammate Darius Miles? Like, I know all of this is tricky. At the same time, when you're trying to evaluate taking someone that high, how much does that affect you?
So let me take this two ways. In terms of how it affects teams, I have not heard a ton in terms of teams being all that worried. Not worried about it. I have not heard a team tell me that it is like disqualifying in any way. Now, obviously, Brandon will go through the interview process and teams will need to gather answers on this. And based off of the fact that he obviously went into interviews and just said that, like, there are some things here I can't talk about, it is going to result in exactly what the Hornets, are reportedly doing, where they are sending people down to Tuscaloosa to try and gather as much information about the situation as humanly possible. I think everything will be played out there and we will figure out what that looks like. In terms of me, if I was the Charlotte Hornets, look, I would care about this. Like, I think that you have a situation with Miles Bridges where it seems like there is a fairly real chance Miles Bridges will be on this organization's roster next season. You have a situation with Brandon Miller, who all of the intel on Brandon Miller up until that moment was positive. Like, everybody that I'd talked to had told me Brandon Miller, good kid, comes from a really good family, everything like that. That was a really poor decision in terms of his involvement in this shooting. So it's going to be really tricky, I think, for teams to figure this out. But I think it's especially tricky for Charlotte, where another one of its marquee players is coming off of one of its marquee free agents. I guess we shouldn't call Miles Bridges a Charlotte Hornets player at this point, is coming off of a, felony. He pled no contest to a felony domestic family violence charge.
Yeah. Domestic violence charge, right?
Yeah, I was trying to remember exactly what the terminology was, but it's hard. It's really, really hard. And if I was the Hornets, I would think very strongly about this. But again, I will note that I am very hesitant to say that this should in any way be disqualifying for Brandon Miller, because again, the intel on Brandon Miller was quite positive, and he was not charged with a crime here. And there is certainly some sort of moral important discussion here to be had in terms of his involvement in the shooting. But I still think that the teams involved at the top will have more information certainly than I do. And the police down in Tuscaloosa certainly have more information than I do. And I would really, really like to probably let the process continue to play out a little bit more and understand where exactly all of this sits before really giving a true opinion on Brandon Miller as a human being. But for the Hornets, it absolutely should matter just because they do need to go down this road, do need to understand all of these things because of where their organization sits following the Miles Bridges unfortunate, horrible, tragic thing that happened.
Right. Well, and it's hard as hell, man. Like, I get it, right? Especially with Brandon, because he's not criminally charged, but also he did play a role in somebody's murder, and it's really hard to try to figure out what all that means, especially when you're trying to make the best decision for your franchise. You do have all this positive intel. It's really hard to evaluate, and as you mentioned, the Hornets are in a little bit of a different situation. Doug, you had some thoughts to finish out the second segment real quick?
Well, I mean, Ja Morant hasn't been criminally charged with anything. I've said this before. Like, I think this is... It probably has something to do with they want to do their due diligence because they're probably bringing Miles back, but also you've got this Ja Morant situation sitting out there where Memphis, invested a top pick in Ja, and I don't know if any investigation could have determined that Ja was going to go down this particular path, but I think teams are going to be extra attentive to any of these kind of situations where guys are around other guys and stuff happens, because that feels like where we are with Ja Morant right now.
Right. All right. So let's move on to the third segment. We have another pick to discuss coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We got number 27, too. Remember, this was a draft pick acquired by Mitch Kupchak last year involving a trade with Jalen Duren. Eventually, this thing goes to the Hornets after belonging to Denver for a while. So who are some guys we could target at number 27? Sam Vecenie joins us one final segment next on Locked On Hornets.
Thanks for making Locked On Hornets your first listen. We are back with Sam Vecenie to talk about, one more pick, but the Hornets have 5 picks. They've got some second rounders as well. We just got through the combine process. So, Sam, what are some names that you like out of the combine? Who did themselves a favor? Who might work themselves into that sort of 30 to 35 range where the Hornets have a couple of picks, or maybe even to that 27 spot that they still hold as well?
Yeah, I'm wearing a Marquette hoodie right now. I would say Omax Prosper is a guy that really helped himself at the combine, to be sure. He also had a pro day yesterday that I was told went really, really well. He shot the ball really well in front of a number of NBA executives. So I would say Omax is definitely in the mix in terms of guys at the combine that really helped themselves rise up. I don't know that guys necessarily like Ben Shepherd, Brandon Pajemski, guys like that are necessarily going to be in the mix for the Hornets. But I do think that they, on some level had very positive feedback from NBA executives that I talked to. Those guys really, have very high feel for the game, have shooting, have skill level. Those are the kind of things that NBA teams really, truly look for across the board. In this day and age where skill set and feel for the game really means an exceptional amount with the offensive freedom of movement that the league has implemented. Yeah, I mean, that pick at 20, what is it? It's 28, 29.
27.
27. Yeah, it's there are so many names in that 25 to 45 range right now, guys. Like, you really are going to have to spread yourselves pretty wide in terms of the number of players that you're considering. Like, I think there's a case for them to consider everyone from like Jaime Jaquez. I think that they'll have to take a look at even guys like Gigi Jackson and players that could potentially fall into that 27 range. Like, you're really gonna have to spread yourself pretty wide, and I think that you should even look at guys that are a little bit lower down the board. Like, for instance, I have Amari Bailey at in the 40s right now. Amari Bailey had a really strong combine performance and looks more like the kind of, combo guard that we saw in high school as opposed to, the off guard that was not quite as involved in the UCLA offense when he was in college. So it's tricky. I think you definitely have to look at a number of different options here that you could end up with at 27.
Doug, you're smiling. Why are you smiling? There's something churning up there in that brain of yours. I know you too well. Why are you smiling?
I just love hearing Sam Vecenie drop all of these names on the podcast because, he knows the names. He knows how to pronounce the names. So this is really informative, I think, for us as we dig into our process to make sure that we don't.
Got it.
Exactly. We don't want to make fools of ourselves on here unless we're doing it on purpose. So we appreciate Sam for that. Sam, can you tell our audience something about the draft process? You know, combine, individual workouts, pro days, how the front offices deal with all this, because you talk to these people and you're inside the game. So, like, what about this do people not quite have a grasp on? Like, they don't quite understand how the process works on these kinds of things.
I still am like pretty staggered every year at the combine when people act like there are a significant number of players who like really truly help themselves in the public facing section of the combine. By far, the two pieces of the combine that NBA teams will tell you are most important are the interviews that they do with these prospects and the medical testing and reports that the teams eventually get back. These are the things that the NBA fought for in the new CBA in terms of getting all of the players to come to the combine. These are the things that NBA executives truly like want to know at the end of the day. So while it's nice to see the 5-on-5, and while you can certainly help yourself in the 5-on-5, Jalen Williams of the Oklahoma City Thunder from Santa Clara last year certainly helped himself quite a bit at the combine. There are often very few players who truly move the needle, and that also goes for pro days. Pro days are nice. They are a way for executives to get an eye on what players have improved upon from the end of the season until now as they've undertaken all of this training. At the end of the day, the things that pro days do, in my view, they potentially can open up a prospect to maybe a wider drafting pool. Like if there is a team that didn't really like a prospect during the season, and then they see a pro day and they're like, oh, like this guy fixed his jumper. This guy did this, did that. It might make that team give that player an extra look more than anything else, as opposed to significantly bumping a player like way up the board or anything in terms of stock. And I think that it's a very subtle difference, but I think it's one that people still don't really comprehend. And it's probably like partially on me for covering the draft poorly in some regard, or like the media for covering the draft poorly in some respect.
We just admitted not to knowing how to pronounce Omax Prosper. So I think you're okay, right? Like I think you're good on that.
Like, in some respect, it's probably on, me and other draft media and stuff for always doing winners and losers of the combine. Who played great? Who played well? They're great data points. They matter more than like a single game during the basketball season, right? Like getting to see a guy in NBA spacing against NBA length and everything does matter. But, it's not more than, a couple or, 3 or 4 games worth of a sample, right? Like it's a small piece of the puzzle.
Last question for me, Sam, before we get you out of here. You look at the young core for the Charlotte Hornets squad. They move up, not quite to get Wemby, but still damn valuable pick at number 2 overall. Mark Williams really comes on strong. It takes him a little while to enter the rotation, but we were very pleased with what we saw from him post-Christmas when he made that debut in the rotation. We like Bryce McGowan's here. Like we thought he did some nice stuff as a second-round pick. Steve Clifford called him a pleasant surprise, which is impressive for Steve to admit that about a rookie, right? With the stereotype that he never plays the young guys. It feels, look, we're Hornets fans. We've been burned by hope before. It feels like there's some hope. I mean, how good do you feel about the situation the Hornets are in right now with LaMelo, the second overall pick, Mark, everything within it, right? Like how hopeful should we feel?
Yeah, look, I had a lottery grade on Mark Williams last year. I really liked him. I think Mark's going to be a really good low usage, offensive player that can hopefully anchor a defense and drop coverage and be really valuable. LaMelo is certainly an all-star level player. I will be really interested to see what he looks like this year and see if he can take that next step into being like a number one on like a genuine contender. I think that's the question about LaMelo right now. Like, is he just your all-star level point guard, or can he be that actual number one on a contender, top 10 player in the league, make that leap? I think that's ultimately what we don't know about LaMelo. We know he's phenomenal and a great player and certainly an all-star caliber player. The rest of it, I mean, I think this team genuinely just needs more high-end, high upside talent. Like, their decision with PJ Washington this summer is going to be really interesting, I think, trying to determine, do they bring him back? Do they make a decision to really pay him? They're going to have to pay LaMelo Ball, certainly, and continue down that road. They have the Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward deals that they have to figure out at the very least. Do they move those guys? Do they keep them? Everything like that. McGowan's is interesting, certainly. He's a guy that has a lot of talent, still just filling out the frame, and how he fills out the frame moving forward, I think, is going to be a really, really important piece of what he becomes long-term. I'm not really like a Kai Jones guy. I'm not really like a JT Thor guy. Obviously it seems like at least they missed on James Bouknight, flashes in the G League notwithstanding. Like, they just kind of need more of these guys. Like, the other rebuilding teams across the league feel like they have more of these guys right now than the Hornets. And that will certainly change with the number 3 overall pick. They will be able to pair LaMelo with someone that certainly had, or number 2 overall pick. They'll certainly be able to pair LaMelo with somebody that has this immense amount of upside that is somewhat similar to his. And that will change their trajectory moving forward. But I think that they are still in talent accumulation mode more than anything, which is probably why I was a little bit worried about some of the Mitch Kupchak comments after the lottery.
Not being picky.
But I think they should be a little bit more in talent accumulation mode than they should be in like, oh, we have our guys now, we're trying to fit around the guys. I don't know if they have all of the guys that they need yet.
No,
Right.
Sam, I said the rules should be you have to go best player available if your team hasn't won a playoff series in the last 3 presidential administrations, right? Like, at that point, you always have to go BPA. Sam, man, we've had a great time here. Thanks so much. I'll say this. I'm driving the Scoot wagon, but if you want to test drive the Scoot wagon, I'm good to hand over the keys. We're betting on that Scooty here, and we appreciate all of your
Scooty booty. Okay, yeah, we're ready for it.
Is the Scoot wagon purchased with eBay Motors? Is that a thing here?
Exactly.
The guaranteed fit, Sam. You are guaranteed the right fit with over 1,200 parts available. You're welcome. Okay, like there's so much, and so
I'll tell you, we're the rear bumper for Scoot. That's going to take the Hornets very far. I'm just telling you right now.
I'm sorry, 122 million. Goodness gracious, 1,200 parts. It's actually 122 million. So there's plenty of parts from eBay Motors. That's Sam Vecenie. Draft work is second to none. Follow him on Twitter at Sam_Vecenie, senior writer at The Athletic. Also, host of the Hoop Theory podcast, or the Game Theory, host of the Game Theory podcast on YouTube. So make sure you go check it out. Sam, we appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Anytime, guys.
I have to ask again as we transition to the outro. What's going on, Doug? What's going on up there?
I'm glad Sam had a good time. That's what we're all about on this show, bringing guys on and having a good time. And I felt like he had a good time.
Well, he's a Scoot fan. That's why we're really happy, because he is advocating for Scoot, and we want Scoot. And so it looks like that is going to be the pick.
Well, we've been focusing on Brandon Miller for a couple of episodes now. I think we've given fair treatment to Brandon Miller, and I think and honestly, I feel like so did Sam. Sam seemed to say, look, if Brandon's the pick. But I would point out to folks that while he was comfortable with the Hornets taking Brandon Miller number 2, he also said that, Brandon Miller looks like an all-star player. And I think when you have the number 2 pick and you have a player in Scoot, who I feel like is a potential All-NBA player, and you have a potential all-star in Brandon Miller, I think you take the guy who has the All-NBA ceiling.
Yeah, no. I think we agree 100%. I think we have been in agreement for this entire time. All right.
Scoot.
That's Doug Branson. Find his work, everyhornetsboxscore.com, and check me out on WFNZ 12 to 3. Really appreciate the time from Sam Vecenie as well as you. Make sure your second listen is Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the league with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.